Homestead Grandma here. Today is cool and pretty darn windy, so I'm doing inside stuff right now. I'm gonna make some oatmeal scones. Last time I made it, it was a little bit dry, so instead of, that recipe recommends melting the butter, and it calls for a stick, so I'm not gonna melt it. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut it into tiny cubes. Normally you would use a pastry blender to combine your dry ingredients with your butter, but I had surgery on my wrist. I don't remember when I had it. I guess it was in June. And it's still kind of rehabbing, not back to full strength yet. So I have a little trouble using the pastry blender. So what I do instead is I cut the butter into tiny little cubes. This is a short and fat stick of butter, and I've cut 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, kind of cut 6 layers. They didn't all cut straight. And then I'm gonna cut this way, try to at least get 4, maybe 5 slices in. Now, of course, my hand holding it is probably warming the butter up a little bit. And you want the butter cold. Some people actually recommend freezing it and then running it through a grater, which I could do, but I'm just gonna get this cut and stick it in the freezer, I think, real quick, while I mix the dry ingredients and the wet ingredients. So the butter is chilling. I've got 2 cups of oats. I've got 1.5 cups of flour. Now I have mixed wheat and white because I accidentally bought white flour and I need to use it up. But I prefer organic whole wheat. They basically use Roundup to open up the kernels of wheat and oats. So I go organic when I possibly can. I don't like things that cause cancer because I've had it. I'm adding 1/2 teaspoon of salt, a tablespoon plus a teaspoon of baking powder, not soda, powder. And it called for a 1/4 cup of sugar, and I use brown sugar instead of white. So I'm gonna mix this in. And that's all the dry ingredients. And when you mix your dry ingredients, then you can add the butter, but I'm going to go ahead and mix up my wet. Now this called for the butter to be melted, like I mentioned, and combined with the milk and the egg, but I did not do that. So there's my Marin egg. It's probably a large egg. You're supposed to whip the egg till it's frothy, which I'm trying to get. This is probably easier if you have a mixer, but I don't, so I do it all by hand. There's I'm upped it from 1/3 cup of milk to 1/2 for a little more moisture. So there are my wet ingredients. I'm gonna grab that butter. It hasn't been chilling long, but it probably makes a difference, just so it's not melty around the edges. So now the butter, I'm going to just crumble into this light, dry mixture and try to get it all in its little pieces as much as possible. And then I want the flour to stick to every side of the butter so that the butter doesn't stick together. You want the butter as completely separate as possible in the mixture. because you're going to fold it in, and then the butter is what's going to add moisture and flakiness to the dough. And apparently, since they use melted butter in this recipe, they weren't really focused on the flaky aspect of scones. But I think that the flakiness adds a lot to scones, just like it does with biscuits. You like to see your layers if possible. I'm going to have my oven preset at 420. So these scones will probably set a little while it heats up. And when I get this mixed, I'm going to put it out on the parchment paper, but not yet. I did sanitize my countertop like you're always supposed to do. And I'm just getting these last little bits of the butter mixed in with the flour. Okay. So then they say make a well in your dry ingredients. So a well is just dig a hole. So I've got a little hollow space, and I'm going to pour my milk and egg in there. And you can do this with your hand, and eventually you will put your hand in there, but I'm just trying to blend this up. This is all of my ingredients now. The actual original recipe called for currants, but I don't have them. And I made it before without them, and it's still very good. Rustic, Scottish type oatmeal scone. Looks like I may need to add a little more milk because it's not coming together into a dough very well. My handle came off. Didn't expect that. Okay, well, I'm done with this spatula. And let me get some more milk. So that was a half cup, and since my butter is not melted, it's really not enough moisture, so I'm adding a couple of glugs of milk. And you want it to be kind of a rough, shaggy dough. And all shaggy means is that it's sticky, and it's getting sticky now. So I'm getting it combined. And when I don't have any more dry on the bottom, then I'm going to turn it out. Let me put some flour on my parchment paper. I always use parchment paper because it's I don't have to clean the counter as much after and get sticky stuff off the counter. I use this to help my kneading process, and then once I've got it made, I will I'll actually set the whole thing with the parchment paper on a foil lined cookie sheet. So I'm just cleaning my fingers off now. Now with biscuits, you fold the dough 4 times. And I tend to do that partly out of habit with my scones, and just partly because I know it works. And it helps the flakiness, and it helps it kind of stay in layers. So what I do is I pick up one edge of the parchment, hold this in place, and fold. Not hard at all. Then I mash it down to about 1 inch. Now see how it's forming a more cohesive dough. It's sticking together better. So that was one fold. I learned the 4-fold trick when I was a sign language interpreter, and I was training an employee at McDonald's who was deaf, and we were on the biscuit detail. Now I was in West Fort Worth, Missouri City, and the McDonald's was in Pasadena. We had to be there at 5. So you can imagine I got up very early, about 3:30, and took off. That's 3rd fold. But anyway, at McDonald's, they taught their breakfast employees to fold the dough 4 times for biscuits. And it has worked for me. I've done it ever since then. That's the 3rd fold. You can see the butter is not mixed in, so that means when it bakes, it's going to melt in little pockets and make the flakiness form. And this is the 4th fold. Normally, you might have to add a little flour to the top surface here between folds. And I can do that now because I'm fixing to flatten it out into a circle. You can see it still moves on the bottom, so it's got plenty of flour. So I start munching it around into a circle shape and flattening it out. Now this recipe says to divide this dough in half and make 2 circles, but that just makes the scones smaller, and I like to have 1 big scone and not 2 or 3 little scones. It's kind of a little workout to get this all mashed out, but it's very much worth it in the end. I should have put my hair up, and I didn't. I thought it would stay behind my shoulders. Sometimes it does, but not today. So I'm getting it mashed out into a circle pretty much. And it, you know, nobody's going to come along and say, well, your circle's wonky on one side. It's your batch of scones, you know. You don't have to have anything perfect. So I've got that about where I want it. It's a little flat on one side or the other, but it's definitely edible. So then you cut your dough into 8 pieces. And some people can probably just cut it up each slice at a time, but I like to divide it into 4ths and then divide the 4ths into 8ths. Slide it down this way so you can see a little better. And there we are. This is ready to go on a foil-lined cookie sheet, which I do because I don't like washing the cookie sheets completely and getting all the butter off. So I'll put foil under this parchment because it will, the butter will bleed through onto a cookie sheet. So I will see you when the oven is done. Okay, the timer has gone off. Let's see if I can get these scones out. They look pretty good. They're toasted brown on the top. Turn off the oven. Let me get some maple syrup to drizzle on them. This recipe actually calls for maple syrup icing, which uses maple syrup and powdered sugar, but I kind of like the idea of just keeping it healthy and using the powdered sugar, which I can't open with one hand. Hold on. Okay, there we go. They look like they're going to be delicious. So good luck if you want to make these. Look it up on allrecipes.com. You can make the adjustments I did or not. But this is one of the things we do when we don't have as much good weather as we want. And I'll just ask you to take care and see you later. Thank you from Homestead Grandma.